And now, the reason you're all gathered here today. Today's webinar presentation is entitled Managing Contingent Labor Spend in Volatile Markets, the benchmarking study results presented by ProcureAbility. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Marina Anderson, who is the Senior Vice President of ProcureAbility. With over 20 years of experience in the human capital industry, Marina has started, managed, and strengthened client-driven talent acquisition organizations. Prior to joining ProcureAbility, she served many leading Fortune 1000 companies in procurement recruitment, business development, and project management. In these roles, she was responsible for developing and leading best-in-class operations and driving business growth. Marina is an often sought expert providing current insights into hiring trends and best practices in the procurement and supply chain talent space. She maintains an extensive network of procurement and supply chain professionals, and she holds a bachelor's degree from Western Michigan University and was named a pros to know by supply and demand chain executives. We also have Kim Neeson, who is the resource director at ProcureAbility. Kim is an industry expert with more than 20 years of successful experience in talent acquisition, managed service, and procurement. She has an extensive history of innovation and enhancement that elevates operational effectiveness, employee engagement, and client satisfaction. During her tenures at Randstad, SourceRight, and Pontoon, Kim developed, implemented, and operated several contingent workforce-related programs. More recently, she has led the global enterprise-wide professional services MSP under Global Spend Management at Aon Corporation. Kim holds a bachelor's degree in business from Marquette University, and she has a proven ability to foster relationship and is most fulfilled when helping people to grow professionally. I love that. We are so honored to have you join us, Marina and Kim, and we're looking forward to what you have to share. I'm going to hand off the mic, turn off my webcam to preserve bandwidth here, and hand over the slides to you. Folks, don't forget, use the Q&A box to submit your questions and answers throughout the presentation. We will answer them at the conclusion of their presentation.
Thank you, Mary. I'm turning off my camera to save bandwidth too as we share our presentation. So I am glad that our webinar is this week. Since I'm in Texas, I was thinking this morning, I'm very glad it was this week and not last week when we didn't have power. So welcome all of you. We're excited to present to you today. Let's see. I may need help driving. Mary, it looks like, let's see. It is stuck on this slide. There we go.
There we go. I see the company overview. Yeah, lovely. Just even though we practiced, it gave you even more delay. So I see the company overview now.
All right, sounds good. So today we're excited to present the findings of our contingent labor benchmarking study. The purpose of this study is to provide contingent labor benchmarking data to those who manage contingent labor spend. The majority of the concepts in our study are going to survive the volatile labor market conditions that we're facing today. But given the unique environment we're in, we're also going to focus on the pandemic's impact on contingent labor. So just a little bit about ProcureAbility. ProcureAbility has been a procurement solutions firm since 1996. We work with companies of all sizes, and our heaviest focus is within the Fortune 500 sector, and our clients represent all industries. Our delivery models include procurement consulting, staffing, direct hire recruiting, and we have a scaled procurement model, which is more of a programmatic and outcome-based approach to resourcing your organizational needs. Additionally, we offer market intelligence, and we have a desirable procurement data analytics offering, which is focused on spend transparency and opportunity assessment. And this was initially developed to support our consulting practice, but it's now a standalone offering available to our clients. Our clients appreciate that we're experts in the procurement space and are flexible and solution-driven to meet their needs. And I look forward to connecting with you if you'd like to discuss any of your organization's needs. So during the webinar, we're going to be discussing the pandemic's impact and the overall condition of today's labor market, the most commonly used contingent labor models, the best opportunities to generate cost savings, and how to improve and measure supplier performance. Our hope is that you're going to walk away from today's session with a better understanding of how to manage contingent labor spend, and will be able to use the insights that we've provided to determine how to develop or enhance your contingent labor category strategy. So starting with the pandemic's impact on contingent labor, ProcureAbility did a benchmarking study a few years ago on the continued rise of the gig economy, but the pandemic has driven this trend really into overdrive. There are a few things that are affecting this. Many companies are facing hiring freezes, or they're looking to cut overhead costs. So they're taking advantage of the gig economy and they're using contingent workers. The pandemic has increased worker absenteeism due both to illness and the fear of exposure for on-site workers. And we've also seen an increase in the use of contingent workers to support medical leaves of absence. Workers are facing both physical and mental health challenges due to the pandemic. Companies are viewing contingent workers more holistically as part of their workforce, and they're beginning to focus more on what skills are needed to accomplish specific work streams versus focusing on filling a specific title and role description. We've certainly seen this trend in our business. And as workers who can be remote are now working from home, candidate availability has extended beyond local geographies. This is giving companies more flexibility to find the right person for their needs, regardless of where they're located. And many who have been displaced from FTE roles with companies are now migrating to the contingent workforce, and that's improving the talent pool. Many companies are concerned with worker engagement among their new remote workforce. And while some workers not accustomed to working remote may struggle to stay engaged, others are finding that their remote capability is causing them to work extended hours. The extended geography is also posing some time zone issues that we're seeing, and worker burnout can result. So companies need to measure productivity and make sure that they're adequately staffed to meet business demands. Companies who didn't have a remote presence before are facing new challenges now with tax and employment laws and managing risk and data security potentially across state lines. So many different factors have affected the labor supply. Health concerns, family demands, and government policies have all played a role in worker availability and productivity. And all of these challenges can make the use of contingent workers and the flexibility that they offer more attractive to companies and emphasize the need to have a solid contingent labor strategy. So about our study benchmarking and practices were organized along 4 major themes: the pandemic workforce and volatile labor market, contingent labor models, cost savings, and supplier performance. We evaluated 30 benchmarks and practices, and our study included participants across several major industries. Participants included contingent labor category managers and also MSP program managers representing several large companies. So with their perspective, 52 companies were represented in our findings. As we go through the remainder of our presentation, we're going to reveal our key findings, and we're going to provide some recommendations from these findings and our experience, both as a sourcing firm and as a staffing firm, to help you develop the best contingent labor category strategy for your organization. Both internal and external conditions impact which contingent labor model you should choose. The volatile labor market that we have today is certainly impacting companies, both as they work to develop new strategies because of an increased need for contingent labor, and as they shift current strategies to adjust to the current labor market. Before developing a contingent labor strategy, you're going to want well-defined goals. All strategies have advantages and disadvantages, and the goals of your organization will determine the best model or combination of models for you to choose. Most companies have cost savings as a goal, but when everyone is competing for talent, it's harder to negotiate just based on rates. So we're going to share with you some creative ways to control cost outside of just rate negotiations. And last, we're going to talk about how to improve supplier performance. Contingent labor is an area that's very relationship driven, and you're going to want to have reliable partnerships with your vendors. All right. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Kim to discuss the different contingent labor models and our findings.
Great. Thank you, Marina. So today we're going to talk over 4 different models that are very common to contingent labor: the max bill rate, markup on pay rate, open bill rate, and fixed rate by job title and geography. I'm going to go a little bit into each model and explain. When we think about max bill rates, this is the rate that a supplier is not allowed to submit above. In most circumstances, you would have a rate card that would be created with a max bill rate for each job, and then the supplier would submit against that rate. Markup on pay rate is where you would have a certain percentage over the pay rate in contracts with your suppliers. So let's say you would set a 50% markup on top of the resources pay rate. The markup can vary based on different positions that you fill. Maybe you would have a lower markup for admin clerical type positions and a higher markup for professional roles such as IT. Then we have the open bill rate model, and that's pretty much just what it is, an open bill rate. Suppliers can submit candidates based on any rate that they choose. You would provide them a job title and job description, and then they would submit at the rate that they feel is in line with the market. And lastly, we have fixed rate by job title geography. Excuse me. This is where you have a set rate per job per geography. So for example, if you had a category manager position that you were looking to fill in the city of Chicago, your rate card would have that maybe set at a rate of $125 an hour. And so then suppliers would submit at the $125 an hour rate. And you would do that for all of your different types of positions. When we think of all of these pricing models, there are advantages and disadvantages to each model. A few of the advantages to utilizing a max bill rate is that you can control your costs because you have that ceiling of a rate. So it's easier to forecast because you know that your rates won't go above a certain set amount. Also, it allows you to ensure that you're utilizing market rates. So since you're building a rate card, you're doing the research to make sure that you have market rates in place. A few of the advantages for markup on pay rate would be kind of the same thing. You can control costs as well because you have a set markup. You don't have that max ceiling, but you do have a set markup. So if you standardize your pay, you can kind of figure out what your max rates will be in the end. And then you can have less complicated contracts. So if you have multiple suppliers and you write into your contract that you have a set markup of, let's say, 50% over the pay rate, and you have that same contract for all of your contingent worker suppliers, then that way your contracts would be similar and seamless, and everyone would have to agree to the same contract. And then we have the open bill rate model. So some of the advantages to that is really there's no restrictions. So it's a really good model for your suppliers. They can submit at any rate that they choose. It's really a great opportunity for niche roles or hard to fill roles. And what we often find is that you'll get a better quality of candidate just because the rate is open and suppliers are able to submit without a ceiling. They can pay some of their candidates more money than what they could if you had the controls of the markup or the max bill rate in place. And it also creates a competitive market for your suppliers. So for example, since your suppliers are bidding blindly to these roles, knowing that they're competing against other suppliers, oftentimes they'll come in at a rate that they feel is very competitive because they want to win the business. And then fixed rate by job title geography. This is really one of the advantages is that you can standardize your rates since you have a set rate for every job title. It really ensures rate card compliance, and you can flex that rate based on the changing workforce in the industry, as long as you're upkeeping with your rate cards. A few of the disadvantages to these models when we think of max bill rates and fixed rate by job title geography is that they're very rigid. Especially the fixed rate, it's a set rate. So you're not giving your suppliers any flexibility there. And also with the max bill rate, being that they always have to come in within a certain rate range, if there's a better candidate for that role that was above that rate range, you're losing the ability to possibly see some of those candidates. which could affect quality. And then also for those two, particularly max bill rates and fixed rate, you really need to make sure that you're monitoring your rate cards at least I would say every 6 months with the changing industry. You don't want your rates to be out of market. Otherwise, you're going to lose candidates to other competition. And so it just takes a lot of monitoring and upfront work to keep those rate cards in place and up to date. Some of the disadvantages on markup on pay rates, because you're asking for a markup, you are in some way knowing what the pay rate is to the employees of your suppliers, which can cause potentially a co-employment issue. You really shouldn't know what your suppliers are paying their resources. Oftentimes candidate quality could suffer because there is a set markup, and what we've seen in the past or in the industry is if a supplier has, let's say, client A and client B, and client A has an open bill rate or even a max bill rate model, and client B has a markup on pay rate model, sometimes they might submit their better candidates or better quality candidates to client A because they don't have there's just a max rate or maybe an open bill rate, whereas they can charge any markup they want to, and with client B they would have to adhere to that set markup. So sometimes they pick and choose which client they're going to submit certain candidates to based on how their rate models are set up. It also requires a lot of monitoring and auditing to ensure that your suppliers are compliant with that markup. So again, you're going to be devoting some time to that. And it can be a little bit difficult to evaluate supplier performance when you think about the fact that all of your suppliers are adhering to the exact same markup. It's kind of hard to really be able to determine if you're getting the best value from your suppliers. And then open bill rate, really the disadvantages are there is no cost control since you are just allowing your suppliers to just openly submit. So it's hard to forecast, hard to budget. And then also you'll find over time that your resources will have varied rates. So going back to that category manager role in Chicago, you might see that maybe you have multiple category managers and one supplier is billing at $150 an hour and another supplier is billing at $100 an hour. So you just have some variance there in your pay and bill rates that can get wide. So those are just a few of the advantages and disadvantages when it comes to these models. And now we're going to look at when it's best to use each model. So just like on the last page when I talked about some of the advantages and disadvantages, there's definitely times when you would say that it would be preferred to use a certain model. So when you think about max bill rates and even open bill rates, they're both really good for professional roles. Open bill rates are better for those, like I said, those niche or hard to fill roles. Max bill rates and markup on pay rate are also great for volume hiring because you can standardize things. So for example, you can have similarity in bill rates for the same role. And max bill rates and markup on pay rates, I also think are great if you have an MSP program in place with your organization because they can be easily monitored by your MSP and you can put that work on them versus you. Some other places to use markup on pay rate are roles that convert often to FTE. It's a great opportunity for this type of model because you can decipher what they're currently being paid. So if you do have a lot of roles that convert to FTE, it's a little bit easier to figure out that conversion salary. When we think about open bill rates and fixed rate by job title geography, I would say that both of these are good models to use in a market that is unstable, like today. Open bill rate especially allows for more flexibility because it's open, there's no restrictions. Whereas the fixed rate by job title does allow for that flexibility because you can easily update your rate cards. Again, you just have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence of monitoring those rates. But for example, if you're finding that there's a higher demand in the market, you can increase your rates by maybe 2, 3, 4% if you need to adjust in that way. So on our next slide, we're actually going to do a quick survey. So up on your screen, you're going to see different rate models that I just went over. And then there's also an option for other. And so what we'd really like you to do quickly is just take a moment to select which model based on everything I went over that you prefer to use in your organization or that you're currently using today. And we're just going to see how it aligns with the feedback that we received with our survey respondents, which we'll show you on the next slide. So if you could just take a second to do that.
Excellent. We're about halfway through the audience here. I absolutely love this model comparison slide. And which model pricing do you prefer? Thank you so much for putting this in one place where it's easy to reference. That's excellent. And I just appreciate that. What do you expect the answers to? Oh, look, we're getting a leader here. What are you thinking the answers might be?
Well, if I tell you,
okay,
what the survey said, but it came back a little bit different than our survey.
Interesting.
I was actually thinking most people would choose max bill rates, but markup on pay would probably be my second choice. So,
okay.
But I don't know, Marina, if you have any other thoughts on what you thought people were going to choose.
Yeah, I was like you. I expected it to follow more the survey results in terms of the next slide, which we'll go through how our respondents responded to it. It's not, let's see, having technical difficulties again. Maybe there's a bit of a delay. There we go. There it goes. So this is how our respondents responded to it. So a little bit different on how the SIG audience responded and how our benchmarking study respondents responded. Kim, do you want to cover this slide here?
Sure. Yep. So one of the questions in our survey was obviously that same question you just answered. And as you can see, 55% of our respondents said max bill rates was the preferred model, with markups on pay rates following behind. Fixed rate by job title and open bill rate actually tied at 10%. Being that I've managed this category before, I agree with markup and max bill rates, especially if you're trying to put controls around the cost and your suppliers. I think that they're both actually really great models and have pluses and minuses that we kind of just went over with the advantages and disadvantages. But I think, for max bill rates from a supplier standpoint as well, because I've been in both shoes, the supplier and the client, and the MSP, actually been in all three roles, but max bill rates kind of offers a little bit more flexibility with your supplier, I feel, because even though they have that ceiling of a rate, they can set their own markup, which helps when they're trying to determine their margins and things like that. But I think they're both really great models. So I don't know, Marina, if you have anything to add.
Oops. Yeah, no, I think that covers it.
Okay. And I think the next slide, I'm actually going to hand it back over to you.
There we go. Okay, so our respondents were split 50-50 as to whether they felt labor rates had increased or decreased as a result of the pandemic labor market. So I think this really emphasizes the volatility of the current market and the disparity of how different industries and even functions within a company may be impacted. There isn't a one-to-one correlation between high unemployment and candidate availability, or high unemployment and decreasing rates. There's just many factors contributing to the labor supply right now. Essential workers maintain employment, and essential industries have in many instances leaned on the contingent workforce to increase the number of available workers to meet consumer demand. And in essential roles where remote work is not an option, there's a fear of COVID exposure. So in these cases, we're seeing an increase in rates because the pool of candidates willing to risk exposure is lower. Telework, as we know, has preserved many jobs during the pandemic. And as we mentioned, the remote workforce is opening up worker possibilities due to increased geographies, and workforce reductions and temporary layoffs are increasing the number of available candidates in the market. So there's many other factors that we couldn't fit into the presentation today in terms of the market, but it's very dynamic right now. We're facing dramatic fluctuations in the supply and demand of workers. And it's just hard to predict the rate of economic recovery. Companies are finding that using contingent workers gives them the cost flexibility that they need. So while our survey respondents recommend max bill rate, overall, based on the volatility of the pandemic labor market, we suggest that you consider an open bill rate model. As Kim mentioned, with this model, suppliers can flex their rates with the current market conditions and are not limited to a cap on rates. So this is going to open up your candidate pool, and it's going to allow you to fill needs more quickly and with the best talent. All right, now Kim is going to discuss the best ways to obtain cost savings.
Great, thank you, Marina. So I'm going to talk about some of our key findings from our survey when it comes to cost savings. When we reviewed the data that we received back from our survey respondents, we found that 34% found that the max bill rates provided the most savings, along with markup on pay rates, with a very close second at 33%. We also saw actually that a few of our respondents wrote in that they preferred a combination of those two. So a blend between the max bill rate and the markup on pay rate. So if you're not familiar with that combination, basically what you would do is you would have a set markup. So let's say, going back to that category manager role in Chicago, let's just say that was one of your roles. You would say, okay, we're going to have a 50% markup on that position with a ceiling rate of $125 an hour. So that means that suppliers would have to submit below $125 an hour rate and could not charge more than a 50% markup on top of the pay rate. And what that combination does is it actually allows a couple things. The quality can be maintained because you're kind of driving the pay to the candidate, meaning that you can guarantee pretty much that the supplier isn't taking 80% of that margin and only giving 20% to the worker. So you're being able to maintain a fair pay to the employee. And then also you can set the max bill rate. So when it comes to budgeting and forecasting, you know that your rates aren't going to be above a certain amount. It actually is a really good way to combine cost savings and be able to monitor your suppliers and make sure that they're adhering to the program appropriately, or and things like that. So, and then fixed rate by job title or geography was only at 8%, and open bill rate, of course, obviously was at 0. You're not really going to find cost savings with an open bill rate unless you did something like a negotiation on top of that, which we'll get into on the next slide. But really, max bill rates and markup, or the combination of the two, is the best way to look at cost savings when it comes to those different models we talked about. We also found that 78% of our respondents do track cost savings when it comes to contingent workforce, and that 53% actually include cost savings as part of their KPIs with their suppliers. So that's something that you can do and write into your contract with them, and let them know that part of their supplier performance would be monitored by how much savings they can help generate for their programs. So on this slide, we're actually going to get into some of the other ways that you can capture cost savings when it comes to contingent labor. I am going to speak for a little bit here, so sorry, this one might get a little long, but there's a lot of information here that I hope will be really beneficial and useful to you. And so, as we talked about earlier, obviously, the rate models have a way of generating some cost savings. On our survey question, we actually asked the respondents to rank in order from greatest to least what they preferred or how they felt they utilized or captured the most cost savings. And instituting process efficiencies came in first, followed by discounts, rebates, a bunch of things around rate cards and rate benchmarking, and then eliminating maverick spend, mandated competitive bidding, and mandated furloughs. So I'm going to actually do a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these, just to kind of give you some ideas around different cost savings. You may be familiar with some of these already and may have implemented some within your programs or your strategy, but maybe there's some ideas that you weren't aware of that hopefully we can go over with you. So when we think about instituting some of the process efficiencies, there's different things that can come into play with contingent labor. For example, you can automate the payment process that you have. You can, by bringing in possibly a VMS, or just, paying all of your suppliers in the same way. So you can standardize contracts with your suppliers. Maybe you have separate contracts for each of your suppliers. And if you have one standard staffing agreement for all of your suppliers. It will save you time and money in the end. You can bring in a VMS or MSP if you don't already have one in place. Depending on your volume of spend, you need to have, a rather larger volume of spend really to make that gain you any savings. But bringing in a VMS or MSP, even just a VMS on its own and managing it in-house, rationalizing your supplier base can give you an influx of savings as part of a process efficiency. Oftentimes, if you spread out the volume of your positions between less suppliers, the more volume that they have, the less you might pay in the end. And then also supplier stacking, looking at that, so meaning no third-party engagements. So oftentimes when, you might have one supplier that uses another supplier to help fill the position. So that first supplier is going to charge you a rate, and then the second supplier is going to charge them a rate. And so they're actually stacking the cost for you, and you'll find that you could be paying double for the resource. And then payrolling contractors. If you find that many of your contingent worker positions are filled with referred candidates that your hiring managers are actually referring, finding a strategic partner or a strategic supplier that can actually payroll these candidates for you, or reaching out to a payroll provider, can save you money in the long run by being able to negotiate a set standard payrolling rate with them that could be often a lot less than the standard markup that they normally charge. And then when we think about discounts and rebates, there's lots of different things that come to mind. So for example, volume rebates. As I said before, if you rationalize your suppliers and have less suppliers and they have more volume, you may be able to add in a volume rebate where the more their volume goes up, you get a rebate back. You can look at tenure discounts where, that's basically where the contractor is there for a certain amount of time. And as they continue to get extended, their rate may drop with each extension, or maybe it's every 6 months or every 90 days. And then prompt pay discounts. So offering a discount when you pay the supplier within a certain amount of time, the sooner, the bigger the discount. So maybe you'll pay them within 5 days, 10 days, 15 days, so on and so forth. We also, when we think about all of the rate cards, so I know we talked about that in some of our models when we talked about the max bill rates and the markups, but just having set standard rate cards in place really can ensure cost control. Again, it does take some monitoring. Rate negotiations at the offer stage. So this would be where, when you have a candidate submitted to you and you ask the supplier to come down on their rate. One thing I would note here is that, when you're trying to negotiate rates with your suppliers, you want to make sure that you are providing them with the correct rate range to begin with. And so this isn't an opportunity for you to, ask them to come down $10, $15, $20 an hour. It's really just a few dollars off that you're trying to get, just to get a little bit of savings there that you can track as some hard dollar savings. And then rate benchmarking, we talked about in the previous slides too, when it came to, the fixed rate and the max bill rates. Eliminating maverick spend. If you aren't currently managing your contingent labor spend very strategically, if you don't have an MSP or a VMS in place, or you don't have someone that's directly responsible for managing that spend, it's a good idea to maybe think about that and really trying to get a handle on all of the contingent worker spend that you have out there, so that you have visibility into it as a whole, so that you can really see, how much you're paying, how many suppliers you have, how many contract workers you have. This actually came up during the pandemic right now, as companies were trying to have people work remote or determine who is in and who is out of the building. Also communicating out to their employees. They do have to also communicate to their contractors. So by having that spend under control, you'll know how many resources you actually have working in the building and where they're located, or are they remote, are they on site. All of those types of things can be managed by really managing this category. And then mandated competitive bidding. is where you enforce your suppliers to compete for every position. This is, again, kind of going under the eliminating network spend by having your hiring managers utilize procurements or, an MSP to bring in contingent labor. It allows them to follow the process that you have in place versus going rogue. Oftentimes you'll find that hiring managers developed a relationship with a supplier, or maybe it's a neighbor, or someone they go to church with or something that they've brought into the company. And so, this would eliminate those types of contracts where they're just continue to use the same supplier, not necessarily getting the best rate for what they're looking for. And then mandated furloughs. We have a few clients, and in the past, I've also worked with companies that have actually instituted furloughs around major holidays such as Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, where they ask, depending on the urgency or the what the contractor's doing there, they'll ask to have those contractors take off maybe the week between Christmas and New Year's. And so they can subtract that from their spend and capture that as savings. And then a couple other things that I just wanted to point out. I think I mentioned it earlier, but standardizing the supplier contracts is a really good one, just because it will save you time and money in the end. And then managing overtime costs. So something that a lot of people don't think about, but when you have contingent resources, having a policy out there that states that all overtime must be pre-approved before it can be worked by a contingent worker, so that you can really get control over those costs. Or even, overtime is worked and it's paid out at 1.5, and normally suppliers will bill it at 1.5. You can actually try and negotiate with your suppliers there to see if they would bill the overtime at 1.4 or 1.3, just a little bit less. They still have to pay, obviously, their resources at the 1.5, but they could bill a little bit less. So those are just a few of the ideas and best practices around contingent labor savings. So hopefully that gave you some new ideas, or maybe you've already instituted some of those and they're working well for you. But I'm going to hand this back over to Marina to talk about supplier performance.
Great, thanks, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's some good ways to make sure your suppliers are performing at their best. One of the best ways is to view your suppliers as partners to your organization. Another good idea, if you're not doing it, is to host a supplier forum. These are an opportunity to bring your suppliers on site, of course, when it's safe to do so. So might need to hold off on that a little while, but hopefully soon. And this will be an opportunity for them to see your location and your environment and meet with key managers. And it's just a great way to build relationships with your suppliers. Our respondents think it is important to measure and report KPIs to improve supplier performance. And they felt that time to submit, requisition response rate, submittal rate, and negative turnover are among the most important metrics for them to track. The large majority of our respondents do measure supplier performance. This large percentage was anticipated by us, since our survey included many MSP program managers. About 3/4 of our respondents conduct quarterly business reviews, and 83% of those who responded agree that these are important for developing supplier relationships and identifying any areas of improvement. Again, about 3/4 of our respondents have rewards or penalties related to supplier performance. ProcureAbility has been strengthening our QBR process and implementing performance measures at our clients beyond what's required. For example, one of our larger clients, we're tracking 38 performance measures, and we're utilizing an operational dashboard. So in this, we're profiling performance at the program level and then also at the resource level. So these include people metrics like productivity and utilization, and program metrics, volume, cycle time, savings, and diversity. So this allows us to speak to efficiency or throughput of our resources and the projected ROI of each resource we have on the account. And our client companies have been finding these very useful to have insights into that information. So probably not surprisingly, our survey audience identified their top performing suppliers as those that provide really good customer service. Some of these areas include knowing their business and getting it right the first time, having open and consistent communication, flexibility, responsiveness, and staying engaged, being willing to handle challenging positions and seeking to provide quality, right fit talent the first time, tracking their own performance and not relying on the company to do it for them, providing dedicated account staff with adequate staff supporting their business. And then lastly, they valued those that have a good pulse on the market and provide market intelligence and valued business insights. So in summary, we encourage everyone to take advantage of the growing gig economy, understand your organization's goals and objectives, the impact of both internal and external conditions to your organization, and then develop an effective contingent labor strategy using the model or models that work best for your organization. Most of our respondents prefer max bill rate. However, you may want to consider open bill rate based on the current labor market or some combination of these models, given the dynamics of the market today. With contingent labor, getting talent in place quickly is highly valued, making time to candidate submittal and other closely associated metrics most critical KPIs to track. And lastly, if you're looking to generate additional cost savings, our respondents recommended, as Kim talked through, instituting process efficiencies and requesting discounts. So I see we have some questions in chat. So we hope that we provided you some valuable insights today as you work to develop or enhance your contingent labor category strategies. And we'd like to open it up to any questions that you've submitted.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I was chock full of some really fantastic things. I was frantically taking notes. I'm sure many others will. I may even go back and listen to this again. So Marina, big question of the day is, throughout all this research and all your conversations and all the case studies you're working through and clients you're helping, do you think the remote workforce is going to continue beyond this pandemic?
We do, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what all the research points to. We did a lot of research on that going into our presentation and have had a lot of conversations. That's certainly the trend we're seeing. I know Forbes did a study that cited 70% of the workforce will be remote at least 5 days a month by 2021. Wow. We came across that study. Enterprise Technology Research was another one that expected the percent of workers working from home to double this year. And they did that study in the fourth quarter of last year. So I think everything points to this being a long-term trend, and people are starting to modify their business operations accordingly.
Absolutely. And we here at SIG are seeing very similar evidence, and just the nature of the questions that we're getting, the operations that people are taking to just transform and accept this reality. Kim, do you think it's okay to flex between rate models with your suppliers? And I have a follow-up question on that one.
Sure, I do. I actually, as we kind of talked about, the combination model too, with the markup on pay rate and the max bill rate. But I think that you can have different models for different positions within your organization. So maybe you have a set model for admin, clerical, or high volume roles where it's the markup on pay rate. And then for your professional roles, you use a max bill rate or open bill rate model.
And to further on that, if you do have a max bill rate, is it possible to renegotiate with a supplier if you have a candidate on board for a period of time, say like after 6 to 9 months? Sort of when would it be reasonable to assume that staffing firm has made their profitability goal?
Yep, absolutely. So, costs for staffing recruiting go down over a certain period of time. So, sometimes after 90 days, 6 months, you can often ask your suppliers to reduce their cost. You don't want to ask them to reduce too heavily, but even to come down a couple percentage points if you have a markup-driven program, for example. I would say that that's definitely something that you could do. And then, as I mentioned, looking at the 10-year discounts. So the longer they're there, asking them to come down, every 90 days, every 6 months, so on and so forth.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. This is a big question. You just fill in the blank. Always a good question. when you're trying to implement an MSP, what would be the easiest way to get everyone to participate when you have pushback?
Oh, I like this question. So
Excellent.
I've implemented MSPs before in my career. And so, one, obviously mandating it, but if your company isn't one where it's a culture of mandating things, I think that communication and education and awareness is key. So branding your program, having a fun name for the program, having it on your intranet site, making it really user-friendly and easy for your manager to be able to access it and find it. Maybe hosting some lunch and learns, doing really good training sessions. But I think the key is education and awareness and just making it very user-friendly so that they want to go there, because it was just so easy to bring in a contingent worker that way versus, the pain that they have to go through to do it all on their own.
Right. Like they can't live without it.
Exactly.
And I love the idea of training just in time too. Like, don't train 6 months before you implement. Train when you're about to implement and about to roll out, so it's fresh in their minds. They're excited about it. They have questions and they can get them answered, within a matter of days or whatever when they start using the tool. So,
yep, exactly.
Here's another really great one. We are currently considering rationalizing our staffing companies with a finite number of preferred suppliers. What do you suppose are the top 3 challenges we're going to face?
So there's several challenges that you may face, but there's also a great opportunity there when you rationalize your supplier base. I would say the first thing that would come to my mind would be the suppliers that you're rationalizing, do they have current headcount? So that's a challenge and a hurdle that you have to just get through. You can, handle that in a couple different ways. Either they get grandfathered in and they, even though you end the contract with them, they stay billing until their assignment is over, or you could look at transferring that headcount to another supplier or to a payroll provider that I mentioned at a lower rate. So that would be the first thing I would think about. Secondly, sometimes when you rationalize suppliers, your managers have a tendency to go rogue because their favorite supplier is now out of the program. So, reaching out to your managers and really having them involved in the supplier rationalization process, I think is key and important, because they have a lot of times the strong partnerships and relationships with those suppliers. So you would hate to rationalize a supplier out that has been really successful with one of your key managers. So if they're part of the process, they feel that they're valued and they're heard. And so that kind of makes it a little bit easier for them when maybe that supplier is going to get rationalized out and they can see the understanding of why. And then also, something to think about is if your company is into supplier diversity, that could be a challenge. You may rationalize out some of your suppliers that were diverse. And so it could affect some of your supplier diversity metrics. And I mean, those are really just 3 things I could think of. I would say too, when rationalizing suppliers, to make sure that you have your key core group of suppliers that can fill all the roles, but then it's also a good idea to have maybe a set of additional suppliers on the side that you use for your hard to fill niche roles that don't get necessarily rationalized out of the program, but they're there for when you need them.
Excellent. That was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here is, with all of the different cost savings ideas, how many do you recommend you can implement with your supplier base at one time?
I would say never more than 2 or 3. You don't want to come heavy-handed at your suppliers, or they're not going to want to support your business, and you're going to lose suppliers. They're going to take their business elsewhere or send their better quality candidates elsewhere. So I would say, if you did the markup as one way, and then, maybe asked for a 10-year discount at 6 months, that's, combining 2 of them, or, just there were so many different ones I went through. Some of the process efficiencies, you could have multiples of those, because if you think about your bringing in a VMS and standardizing how you pay them, but, telling your suppliers that they're going to have to give you a volume discount plus a prompt pay discount plus a 10-year discount, they're not going to want to be part of your program anymore.
Walk away. And you might find yourself deprioritized.
Exactly.
All right. I don't think I see, let me check the chat box. Yeah, do you guys have any closing remarks for the group?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for attending today, and we're excited to see so much interest around this topic. Kim and I kind of feel like we've just skimmed the surface of this topic, and we could go much deeper. So we're actually going to be doing a follow-on white paper over the summer that'll dig into some of these other topics. So if you have ideas too, if the audience has any ideas that they'd like to see covered in that white paper, certainly please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to include them in our follow-up presentation.
What an opportunity. Thank you for inviting that. It was very generous of you. It's always good to have influence from the customer base and understanding exactly what their needs are. So I encourage the group to take advantage of that. Any closing remarks from you, Kim?
I just, again, want to thank everybody for joining. It's always a great, fun topic for me to talk about. So thanks. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Marina or I, at a later point in time.
Absolutely. Yes, Kim, your passion shines through for sure. All right. Well, I guess this will conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much to our presenters for sharing their insights. We look forward to connecting with all of you again soon. We're going to push out a PDF copy of the slides. You can go ahead and download that. Also, keep an eye out for the follow-up email you'll receive tomorrow, which includes a link for that as well. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. Remember to take a break, exercise, and don't work too hard. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.